How's it going? We are getting through all of our various technical challenges right now, but I think we got it. So I'm going to welcome you to the 2023 Oregon Active Transportation Summit, Move into Action. Our session will start in just a moment, but first I want to remind you about the closing reception in Marshall starting after 3:30. The 3:30 to 4:30 sessions wrap up. We'll have happy hour snacks, and if you have a red ticket in your name badge, trade that for a free drink at the bar. And now on to our session. Yeah, Portland Green Loop. Is that who's going first?
Yeah.
Yeah. I will step aside.
Oh, do you want me to go through this?
I can do that for you. It might be easier.
It's actually probably easier if we do it.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
We might have to go back. Is that as long as the cable goes?
Yeah, unfortunately. Well, let's see. Maybe I'll get a bit closer. Make sure that both seeing. Is that working?
So Erica, you just need to sit where you
Yeah, you might need to sit.
Scooch over a little bit. Okay. Hello. Can you see me here?
So
All right.
Back a couple slides so we can start there.
Okay.
So welcome everyone. We're here to today talk about the Portland Green Loop and how active mobility will contribute to Portland's resiliency. So I'm Keith Jones. I'm the executive director of Friends of Green Loop. Friends of Green Loop is a community-based organization that advocates for the development of Portland's Green Loop.
And my name is Erica Strohmeier. I'm an urban planner at Sarah Architects, which is located here in Portland. I'm located down in Oakland, California, though. And real quick, just so you guys can know how Keith and I met, Keith obviously has been working up here on the Green Loop for many years. And I was introduced to Keith through a principal at Sarah Architects because he saw that, I was working on a project that you can see behind me in Silicon Valley. It's the implementation of a Green Loop facility, taking it all the way from concept all the way through construction administration and opening it up. And we just thought that partnering together to really make the Portland Green Loop a reality just made a lot of sense. So we've been spending a lot of time talking about implementation.
So for those that don't know, the Green Loop I can talk a little bit about how it started. So it's part of the Central City 2035 plan that was adopted by Portland City Council in 2018. And I was not involved at that time, but I did go and speak on behalf at council for this. And like probably a lot of people, I just assumed that once it got adopted, work began. But then once I joined the Friends of Green Loop organization, I saw that there was a lot to do and that there was advocacy involved just to get it to the next step, which was, creating design guidelines and master plan. And then we're still not there yet. And that's why I've been filling in some of the pieces around it, because it's a 6 mile, as outlined in the 2035 plan, it's a 6 mile linear park around the city, around the central city. And what that means is that it's not just an infrastructure for pedestrianized space, but it's also community space all around. And so it was chosen because it could define the central city borders. And also pre-COVID, the central city was where they were projecting that in the next 20 years, 30% of the growth and 3% of the growth in Portland would happen in 3% of that land area. And that would create, we were looking to add 36,000 new households in that area and 50,000 new jobs. So as of today, we're still in the process of getting this into a full-blown project at the city. It's now within PBOT, and they're starting to look at those next steps, which are master plans. So I've been working on that community space during COVID, and that's where the conversations with Erica have come into play around what the infrastructure and technical pieces look like.
Yeah, we're having some technical difficulty here. I'm just going to click on the individual slides. That might be easier. Okay.
Would it help if we did like a full Zoom or a full view instead?
No, it's
this is okay. This gets us, let's see where we're at. Yeah.
So these are some of the key objectives outlined in the 2035 plan for the Green Loop: improving health and creating connecting parks, supporting businesses, and all that was done through a lens of economic development, accessibility and inclusion, and placemaking. And those three things sort of became very important, especially during COVID. Next slide. Before we go into that, go back. Yeah. So during COVID, again, we were working to advance the concept of the Green Loop with the city, but then we started realizing that there was a need to develop spaces that were okay for people to social distance and connect to the park to an outdoor space. But then also there's this discussion of we cannot have people inside of businesses at this point. What if we move businesses into the streets? And what if those streets were along the Green Loop? And so what that did was kickstart my organization into a real placemaking mode, and maybe accelerated this a couple of steps ahead of the city where the implementation wasn't quite there, but the placemaking opportunity was. And so that's where we started getting to work.
Yeah, and a lot of that is because this network that I worked on, or am still working on, in Silicon Valley was a combination of placemaking and also a connecting network for people to be able to connect from communities out to the Bay Trail to regional parks and other types of things. So it was interesting looking at the goals for the Portland Green Loop and looking at a lot of the goals that we had for the project in Silicon Valley. And one thing that I noticed and that Keith and I have talked about is, okay, these are great overarching goals, but you're going to need to start digging down, making them more specific so that when you get more specificity to the goals, you can tie those to the design guidelines, which is a clear path for implementation. So these are just some of the things that we have there.
So from a placemaking standpoint, I had a couple of tools in the toolbox. And a project I had started on before COVID was relocating a food cart pod that was located along the proposed section of the Green Loop. It was called the Alder Street Food Cart Pod. We owned 55 small businesses that were mostly immigrant owned. And due to this development, and it was also a huge tourism spot too. So during the last recession in 2008, surface street parking lot owners who were using those for parking primarily looked to shore up their income by placing food carts around the perimeter of those parking lots to make more revenue. And what ended up happening was these businesses flourished and they grew exponentially and became part of our culture. So food carts are great because they're a low barrier entry point into small business ownership. And so they were exactly what the economy needed at that time to create jobs and to contribute. So another piece that we were also started working on during COVID was PBOT introduced something called the Healthy Business Permit Program, which was essentially creating business space, or I'll just say community space as well, because I see it that way, in the streets to help support those businesses. And one that I worked on with Sarah was called Northwest 13th. And for those that are familiar with Portland, Northwest 13th is a kind of a unique street. It's a freight, it's a warehouse sort of district in some ways, but it has these giant wide streets that with these docking bays here. And for years, people have talked about pedestrianizing this. And this seemed like a great opportunity to kickstart that. So in this case, we worked with the business association there, and then the individual businesses along there to create spaces that were both for the restaurants and also community space, because you need to have uses that you don't necessarily have to be a customer to interact with. And this was unique because it was not just a street plaza, which was primarily a block, which is how we've been doing it. It's either a parking space or a block. This was multiple blocks. So we got 3, not consecutive blocks, but 3 blocks in our first round. And then we have a phased approach that will eventually close off the entire street. And that's still ongoing. But it's successful. If you go there now, it's super busy and becoming an attraction. And And so we've been looking at the same sort of, when we did the street plazas, what we noticed was that restaurants were able to use the streets very easily because they could use it for seating and they could cook inside and bring their food out there for seating. But retail really struggled with what to do with street space. And in talking to people, it was that, hey, we're not going to bring all of our stuff outside every morning, and then have part of our stuff inside and part outside. We'd have to double staff at that point. So it really didn't work for them. The next sort of step in terms of getting retail activation was outdoor markets with individual vendors. So, festival type things and so forth. What ended up happening was everyone in the city decided to do a market. And so eventually vendors were like, we love the idea of your market, but we're really tired. Like, we cannot bring our stuff to one more place, pack it in, pack it out. So in looking at, and I'll add one more thing too. If you look at our downtown core right now, we have a lot of vacancy in terms of retail space. And people were still a little bit nervous about getting back down to the city for various reasons. But at the time, it was because I'm not going to sign a 5-year lease if maybe a variant comes through and it wipes out everything again. So I want something that's more short term. So we were thinking, what if we took the food cart model and we used it in a retail environment, a retail application? And so we've been developing this concept of ship and container retail spaces that we can place in the streets. And they require very little in terms of infrastructure. What we found with the food carts, by the way, is we did put them in the street, but having the supportive infrastructure, which is like electrical, water, gray water removal, things like that, is very hard to do. So you need like an actual surface space to do that. But these can be placed in between those places. And the other thing that would work very well would be what I'm calling push carts, so hot dog stands, that type of thing, which would reduce that barrier even lower. And food trucks, because they don't require, they sort of roll in and roll out. Problem is that there are ordinances within the city of Portland that prevent both of those businesses from operating downtown. So we are working with the city at the moment to review those codes, change them so that we can create more robust opportunities for small business ownership and repopulate our small business inventory through these activations.
So when Keith and I were talking about that, I hope this GIF works.
No, it does not.
It doesn't work. My apologies there. Something happened to our presentation, so I apologize. Yeah, so when we were talking about this, obviously, more of my experience in implementation is an actual green loop, the actual facility, and Keith's is more in the placemaking aspect, the community organization, the startup businesses, and kind of how did the two things come together. Without design guidelines right now, you got to look at more of a tactical urbanism approach. So what we did is we were looking at Keith's marketplace concept, everything he's talking about with push carts and food trucks and how those things could come together in an existing street space. So we just came up with this concept. There's supposed to be 3 different options for how the plaza space could work that could be modified at any point in time for a different type of activation that's going on. But we're looking at incubator spaces for small businesses, push carts, other things. But we want to make sure that any of these businesses that would go into this space, they would actually be facing the sidewalk, facing the brick and mortar space, so that there is cohesion between the two businesses and they're supporting each other. As the green loop eventually would turn into a more of a facility that is moving forward without having to use road paint and having to use these tactical solutions, then there can be a lot of change in how that goes. But eventually these businesses, we would hope, for the revitalization of downtown Portland, would move into some of the vacant spaces that exist.
So once we set up these spaces, like the food carts, and then also like Northwest 13th, and in that case, I mentioned that there was a neighborhood association that stepped in. What we realized was that there needs to be some sort of management entity on top of that, because you can't just set it up and then expect it to, maintain itself. There are real things that have to happen. For the food carts, what I did was form a nonprofit. I'm sorry, LLC that's owned by the nonprofit. And what it does is it leases out those food cart spaces, and it provides it pays for the electrical and the water and the gray water and the trash and then the cooking oil disposal and pest control and site maintenance as part of their rent. And then in that project, they gave us it's streets around a park. And so we have a permit for the streets where the food carts are and the park itself. And part of the permit requirements or part of that agreement was that if we take the park, then we also manage it, which means leaf removal and all that kind of good stuff. So this is, I mean, like literally, you know, me cleaning graffiti off the walls, because it was not like, this is not the best park in Portland. It was one that was available. And we were responsible for, like I said, the maintenance of the site and keeping it in and I'll show you sort of the changes that occurred as a result. But on top of that, it's not just about creating that space. We also have to do the marketing and the programming and promotions to keep it going. And then there's some business development and grant writing I'll get into a little bit more. But like, it's not just enough. There's two sort of approaches to downtown revitalization right now, which are programming. Let's just take a space and program it, or these like persistent, what do I call it, presences that you put down there. And you can't go full on with just like activations and doing programming, because you can't program it 24 hours a day. These food carts are around this park now from 8 a.m. in the morning until 8 p.m. at night. Those are eyes on the streets, basically. So with programming, you know, we partner with different community organizations to hold events. This was a street activation I did called the Squilla Viva, which was a school. So they had like, you know, some community performers and some space for kids to play in. And then this one here was part of the Portland Winter Lights Festival, and we held an LED drag show there, and it brought 800 people to our little food cart pod, and every single food cart sold out that night. Took them 2 days to recover because they were completely wiped out. So promotion is also a piece of that, and it really means getting involved in everything you can. So right now, currently I have these things all going on at the same time if you're going down there. Portland Downtown is doing something called the Bloom Tour, where they're installing flowers throughout the city, and then you go visit these flower installations. So we were like, hey, that's a great way of, you know, improving the park. And so we signed up for that and got, you know, an installation down there. And then last year, when I looked at the business, the metrics for food carts, like the peak season is like during the summer, and peaks like around August and September, and then it goes back down during the winter time and hibernates for a bit through March. And so I said, wouldn't it be great if we gave those food carts an extra boost at the beginning of the season? So working with Portland City Council, we were able to declare April as Food Cart Month. Not anything I thought I'd be doing, but I got the proclamation. And so I've been milking it for everything I can. And part of that was with the Oregonian creating Portland Food Cart Week, where we work with the Oregonian to promote all food carts throughout the city. And there's like a passport and you go visit each. And then right now I partnered with Gallery Go-Go, and we got a grant through the Portland Film Office to do an art installation around food carts, which meant that we painted murals on 2 of the food carts, one at either end as you enter in, so that it welcomes you into the cart blocks, but also it really does make these food carts pop. And then we did a tiny cart, there would be 2 murals in the park. And then at the gallery, we printed up 3D models of food carts and had local artists interpret them, which I'll show you in a second. And then, yeah, there they are. So here's some that they did. And so this is on display to bring awareness to those food carts. And then if you go back one, the last thing I did, back. There you go. This is a booklet. I had a photographer come down and take portraits of these food cart owners. Like I said, mostly immigrant owned. And that's a picture that we took right there. We created a zine which told their story and some recipes about their culture and their food. And it's pretty powerful. And so that will be on sale starting, I think, tomorrow at the gallery. And so it's a way of humanizing these businesses, but also recognizing, what goes into them and celebrating this as a culture. And then you were okay. No, go back to up one more. There you go. So small business support. So another piece of this was when I first got into this, I had no intention of running a food cart pod, but when I did, I decided to study as much as I could. And I found a study that PSU had done in 2008 on the new Portland food cart scene. And I was kind of shocked to see that not much had changed. And I did an updated one that's available on my website right now that studies where we've come since then and how we evolved it. But some of this that we're talking about. But one thing that was in there was because these are immigrant owned and they're such small, tiny businesses, they often don't get access to the same services that most small businesses. And there could be language barriers there as one, but also they're overlooked. I literally found a grant recently for small business support that excluded food carts by name. And I think that this is a horrible thing. So we've added business services on top of this. And again, this all goes into the idea of we help these businesses improve what they've got right now and then build like you would anything else. Hire more people and then start looking at opening up a full-blown restaurant, which would then repopulate our retail and restaurant vacancies that we have. So this is what the park looked like before we moved in with food carts. It's on Burnside for those. It sat there for a good 20 to 30 years, built in 1920. And this is what it looks like today. And so it actually has become a destination in the city where people used to just pass it by with something you saw maybe out of the corner of your eye, but we've added a bunch of stuff to this, including bike racks and customer restrooms, employee restrooms. That bus back there is a London double-decker bus, and it serves alcohol. So we're going to turn this into a beer garden later. And then the food carts themselves, they're the only business I've seen so far downtown that are making more money every month than they did last. So this is something that is actually working right now towards revitalization, and we should be looking at more of this type of thing. So that's the business aspect. And then of course, during COVID, it's important to get outside. And so the connection to parks is important too. This is a visualization of what the South Park blocks could look like with the green loop in it and make it more accessible. And then also the green loop goes, as they said, around the central city. It's important, it helps you get around and move around the central city, but it's also really important to get off of the green loop and go into the neighborhoods. And so that's a big push here too, is to go off and explore once you're on it. And I think personally, we just had a report that came out that says ridership is down in the city, and it's kind of all over the place. But as you can see, it's a beltway that goes around the city. And I had this map drawn up that shows sort of outdoor plazas, which are the diamonds here, but also I put the greenways, the bike network on top of this to see where it can connect. And my hope is once this gets going, that it can help, support, sort of expanding this greenway network and supporting it more.
So when Keith and I were talking about connecting spaces in and around Portland, I started showing him some of the work that me and my team had done, looking at how such a facility is going to run adjacent to the right of way, through open space, adjacent to or through a public park, how those spaces could be activated, what other things need to be taken into consideration, down to details, seating, how legible is the pathway? How do people know that they're going to be staying on the green loop and not getting on one of the other facilities? But we also talked about how in Portland in particular, when you're going to be running your facility, even when you're in the right of way, you need to have some form of neighborhood identity so that even if the facility itself has the same look and feel, so the bike path, the pedestrian paths, same look and feel, all of these activations, all of these placemaking things that are going to happen adjacent, they need to reflect what's going on in that community, in that neighborhood, and what that neighborhood really needs. So we've been looking at a whole bunch of different, design solutions to make that happen. And then obviously a lot of the things that we looked at in the project that we worked on, but also can be done around Portland are looking at obviously spaces, programmable spaces, how you're going to bring people back downtown, how you're going to bring people into these different neighborhoods, and also, revitalize spaces such as parks and open space that maybe haven't been taken care of. I know we've been talking about O'Brien Park as well as, a possible location. And some of this, a lot of the success of some of these facilities, as it's shown around the nation and around the world, a lot of it has to do with wayfinding.
Yeah, and so branding became important too. The Green Loop had its own brand. We recently launched the Blue Minar Bridge, a little design for that too, for an identity. But the cart blocks was a brand that we developed because it's located between the South Park blocks and the North Park blocks. And if we do multiple, we can reconnect those blocks, cart blocks. So you have the park blocks and cart blocks. But downtown right now is interesting because there's pockets of activations. So you can have lots of things going on over here and lots of things going on over here. But if you're just visiting as a tourist, or maybe you haven't been downtown for a while, you may not know where all those things are. And really, I've been pushing as much as I can around wayfinding, just to let people know, hey, 3 blocks up this way. And it's a long haul to get there. But the first thing I did was, for the carts, I looked at the pedestrian counts downtown and looked at intersections where things were busiest. So like Owls, right, 43,000. This along here, where you see the green, this is primarily like Mac stops, right? Here's the 2 Mac, red line and blue line, and the transit mall. And so I want them to go down these yellow lines to this location here. So we developed these street stickers, and then we placed them at different areas, and immediately we saw business go up like that.
Okay.
And we wanted to go.
So we're not going to be able to get through our full presentation, but Keith and I will flash up our contact information. You can always feel free to contact us if you have any questions or anything. But continuing on with everything that Keith has already done with the cart blocks and identifying how to get there. One of the things that I've studied with my team for what we did in Silicon Valley is intuitive wayfinding, not having to use signs, not even necessarily having to use letters and things like that for people to identify where they are and where they're going. A lot of that can be done through colors, through icons. Something that we studied has to do with dot patterns, identifying when you're going to be coming into space. When you're going to be coming into spaces where pedestrians and cyclists are going to be mingling. And we took a look at some of the most successful cycle networks around the United States, including the Underline in Miami that's under construction, the Indianapolis Cultural Trail, and of course the Atlanta Beltline. So we created a whole series of signs that would be a consistent form of wayfinding, as well as floor markings that can be applied on the cycle track, consistently used around the entire facility, but integrated with the unique neighborhood touches that Keith has been discussing. So what you can see here as far as our intuitive design solution that my team created is really looking at how the different spaces come together. So you're going to have long slews of just bike track. How is that going to work? It's really what we would call a movement zone. It's where people are just kind of moving. They don't need to know where other things are. Then you're going to get into an awareness zone. So you're going to be approaching a neighborhood. You're going to be approaching a park, something along those lines. And you can use some of that iconography to identify that to the user. And then the mixing zone itself, that's where this flexibility for placemaking really comes into play. I don't think in Portland you need to have any specifics for what that should look and feel like. That should be a play on the neighborhood or the community that you're within. And then, okay, I can get into a whole bunch of different materiality solutions. Everything that we did in Silicon Valley had to go through a sustainability lens. So even the concrete that we used is sustainable concrete. We use a lot of reclaimed wood. So wood, if there's a tree that has fallen in a park, Why can't you dry that wood, reuse it, turn it into furniture in that same park? Those are kind of solutions that we looked at. Again, we talked about tactical urbanism, which is where the Green Loop is at right now, how you can implement now to make space for the future. I'm just going to cut right to the end. Here's our contact information. Really hope to see some big strides happen in the Portland Green Loop over the coming years. And I know that Keith is going to continue working on that. We hope to work together on that here in the near future.
And I would say too, the key to anything that's successful, that's going to be resilient in the future, is having strong community partners and understanding that that space by working with those community partners, that's what's going to make the real success. So,
Thank you very much. We're going to turn it over to Susan.
Yeah, pull up your.
Okay. I'll just use this time to say I'm really honored to be here with all of you today, and especially honored to be sharing this session with Erica and Keith. We have a lot of parallels, a lot of commonalities. We got together for brunch this morning, and Keith and I have known one another for several years, pre-COVID, but it's really just fascinating, the parallels we've had. And I think the other thing that's really important to understand is we're nonprofits. We're essentially volunteers on this. If we get money, great. But I think a lot of times people look at our materials and think, oh, what transit agency or what public agency are you with? And although we've got some really great backgrounds in economic development and with transit authorities, really, we're largely doing this, just truly to be altruistic, to try to help our community. And that's only accelerated coming out of COVID. And I'll just start off with a little brief introduction of myself. I spent 10 years with the agency that's now known as Business Oregon, so the state's economic development department. I am a co-founder of Cycle Oregon. I was the original ride director and spent 15 years then as the vice president of Cycle Oregon. And then I spent 10 years with the Port of Portland, and then 5 years in emergency response with a global helicopter company that's called Erickson. It's been here in Oregon for about 53 years. So resilience in particular is really the common thread here between our presentations. And so really I got into this looking at the helicopter side of things from an aerial perspective. When roads are shut down, infrastructure shut down, just it's a best practice around the world to have aerial equipment in order to come in, because you don't need a runway necessarily. And really, it was when I was working with Erickson that I started taking flying lessons. And so flying over the Portland region in a little single, just a single engine aircraft, and seeing the topography of the region, and particularly the river running right through Portland, and I'm seeing the choke points on the roadways. And all of us have traveled to different river cities around the world and seeing the use of water-based transit to get people around, and just kind of going, why is it that we're not using these water highways, if you will? And is this something we should be considering? So it was really just as it's not. Look, a miracle. So it was just really curiosity that killed the cat on this. I just thought I'm going to do a little bit of research on it, and I put together about a 12-page plan. And I went up to Seattle. I met with ferry experts up there. I went down to San Francisco, where Erica's from, and I met with them. They all said, we love Portland. We've always wondered why you guys don't have this. We will help you. And there have been 5 mentors, particularly out of the Seattle ferry market, that I've been working with for the past 6 years. And by and large, the pro bono. The gentleman that's just retired from the King County ferry service, which is the largest ferry service out of Seattle. He's probably a top 5 ferry leader in the nation, is on our board. And so Paul Broder has been just instrumental in us advancing as quickly as we have. So really, we're here to talk about building a better Portland for the future that's really grounded in safety, equity, that's climate friendly, and of course, resilience, particularly for a river city and using the waterways. I'm not going to talk all the way through our mission statement, but I really do want you to focus on the fact that this is for a public passenger ferry service. And yes, we could privatize it. Yes, we could go ahead and charge higher ticket prices. But foundationally, we really believe that healthy communities are really grounded in safe, equitable transit solutions that everyone can afford. And that's why having a partnership with like the city of Portland in order to tap into federal fundings is really instrumental to us. And, you know, to cut to the chase on this, we have done all this research, and I'll quickly take you through that. We've gathered the community support behind it. We've really focused in on where our pilot project would start. We've done everything we can as a nonprofit. However, we must partner with a public agency in order to tap into public funds, whether those are state funds or federal funds. As nonprofits, there's virtually no funding available, even under the infrastructure bill. So it's a very, very frustrating place to be. Also, these are passenger ferries or foot ferries. So these are not the big car ferries. These are the smaller ones. We have 4 key areas of objectives. So education is one of them, and Frog is based on the Chinookan mythology. And in that story, Frog taught the local people how to fish by going down to the riverbanks and collecting nettles and stitching them together to create nets. And the chair of the Chinook tribal nation is Tony Johnson. And I got to work with him on a major installation at Portland International Airport when I was with the port, and we became friends. And he gave me a lithograph of Frog as a thank you. And so that's our namesake. And then Tony then introduced me to the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde and said, work together. So we have this vision for having names and storylines featuring Native American heritage as part of the ferry service. Health and community is, I think, pretty self-explanatory. And again, just looking at the bridges and some of the needs for seismic upgrades, just some of the concerns in the event of a major earthquake. Also air quality, and we'll be serving Cathedral Park as our first focus community. It's because arguably that's the worst air quality in the state of Oregon is Cathedral Park and St. John's in the North Peninsula. And so as you have I-5 going through that corridor and a tremendous constriction there, as well as the fuel farms that are out there. And so it's a very concerning area from constriction and one bus line right now. Many community leaders I would say we have no transit solutions, but TriMet would tell you we've got one bus line. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we know we've actually, our numbers are pretty darn compelling. 32 million cubic tons of CO2 emissions just to start on this. And then the efficiency of a public-private partnership on this. And one of the things that's kind of interesting from a transit infrastructure perspective, and for those of you that were at the morning session, you heard the woman from ODOT talk a little bit about federal funding. Most of the transit projects for Oregon are a 50-50 match of local to federal. The ferry lobby is very strong federally. And so it's actually an 80-20 match, at times a 90-10 match of federal funds to local match. She made a mention, I know she's super smart, but she said, that federal funds don't include anything for maintenance. Actually, that's not true for ferries. Ferry maintenance is part of the ongoing Federal Transportation Administration Passenger Ferry Fund. It's an annual program. Typically, that pot of money is $40 million a year. Now for this 5-year chunk of the infrastructure bill, it's over $300 million just for passenger ferries. So the money is there. Frog Ferry was born. There's a need to do something different. And again, I didn't grow up as a little girl saying, I want to start a ferry service. This is simply, I was, someone like you attending conferences like this. I've got kids that are 24 and 29. They're super concerned about our planet and climate and resilience. My daughter is terrified of a major earthquake. And so this is just something as a citizen where I looked into it and then realized it's a best practice and really needed. Commuter ferries are a proven worldwide concept. They are very quickly growing around the world. And we have a number of best practice case studies out on our website. We were talking about Brisbane and Melbourne have really similar operations to what we're doing here. And because there is this influx of federal funding being made available, here nationally, there's incredible growth of ferry services. There's a relatively new passenger ferry commuter service in New York. Granted, New York's different, but they had Hurricane Sandy, and they started this ferry operation in 2017. They already have 40 vessels. Then the other compounding the ability to grow is the US Department of Energy has charging infrastructure funding, trillions of dollars coming down for that. So the advent of green transit for ferries, it's here today. You have green ferries currently operating in the Bay Area, out of Boston, even Niagara Falls, that's been an electrified ferry for years, and in Seattle. Uh-oh, is this my map not going to work? Come on.
There it is.
All right now, but it needs to advance. I don't see the little play button. Darn it, if I go back one, because this is kind of a key slide to show. Usually it's across the bottom, little arrow. So what you're seeing here is, this is from Vancouver all the way down to Oregon City. So it's a little over 30 nautical miles. From Vancouver to downtown Portland is 15.5 nautical miles. And for the 10 different ferry stops that are mapped out on this, it's too bad because it's a really cool animated map that grows, but we didn't come up with these stops. We're not precious about the stops. We worked with Metro, TriMet, and PBOT for where there is the greatest need. Yeah, it's just not, sorry, you guys. You'll have to go online to see it, but it just shows the build of this because really in some of the earlier sessions, you've heard about the first and final mile, and that's really, really the case for ferries here. And so we have a business case for each one of the 10 stops that's out on our website under research and then under operational feasibility study. So where there's a current means of getting to and from these stops or where there's the greatest opportunity. Thank you for trying. This gives you a sense of the prototype for the vessel. This was actually created pro bono at an expense of about $50,000 of a boat builder and a designer out of New Zealand. Double-hulled catamaran, super, super safe and steady, very low vibration, which is kind of the wear and tear on passengers. Yes, bicycle. There's capacity for 12 to 13 bikes. Yes, there's a restroom on board, a small concessions area, space for 2 wheelchair passengers. And it's a very low profile because the Willamette River is unusual in that it has a very high tidal fluctuation over the course of the year. It's about upwards of 26 feet, which is a lot. And so that means how much clearance you have under the bridges really changes. It constricts and expands. So this is actually, it's just very low. It's 13.7 feet to abate for that. And so starting out our pilot project, we're just looking at one of these vessels. It has space for 70 passengers operating 6 days a week and the ticket price of $3.50. The pilot project, I mentioned to you, 10 different stops from Vancouver to the north, all the way down to Oregon City. We have basically different versions from a timing perspective for each one of those communities. So the Interstate Bridge Replacement Project, that one, we're not quite sure where that is. There's a great dock up there that the Port of Vancouver owns. It's probably going to be moved. And so rather than getting in the mix on that and having two projects in conflict, we're going to wait until Vancouver decides where that will go. But we can tell you that some of the condo complexes up there include home of the future Frog Ferry, where you can live car-free if you go out to their websites. We decided to start in Cathedral Park largely because there are so few transit options there and the community really, really wants us. You have half of the population identifies as non-white, 25% is living below the poverty line, and they have 3 docks there. And down at River Place, towards the South Waterfront, where the old Newport Bay restaurant is, they have a fabulous dock there as well. So we're using existing infrastructure so we don't have to go in and muck up the water. Of our 10 different locations, 7 have existing docks to it. So these are our people. This is our community. I love them so much. I'm there several times a week. And it just gives you a sense of who they are, the seniors there that need access to really great healthcare down on the South Waterfront are really important to us. And we also looked at where are some of our largest employers, and OHSU, our Oregon Health Science University, is our largest employer in the state of Oregon, 22,000 employees. 700 of them live on the North Peninsula. So OHSU conducted their own survey about a year ago. So this is during COVID, but for healthcare workers, they still need to go, physically to be at the office, most of them. It was the highest response rate they've ever gotten to a survey and the quickest response rate, with 78% of them saying, yes, we want to take a ferry. Currently, their transit is about an hour each way. And for the ferry, it's 25 minutes.
Yeah. Someone has a question on Zoom. Would you like to answer now or after?
Sure. I know they had some questions too, so maybe we should just hold them to the end and then we could both get them. And then in terms of the benefits on this, obviously the communities of color are first and foremost to us. And BIPOC communities in general, there's a very large Latino population living in the North Peninsula, and some of our primary contacts are Latino, and also those getting around in wheelchairs. And we have a community benefit plan that we created working with Sunrise PDX and a number of people that face challenges as they walk through and work through their day. And then the educational component to this that I mentioned, OMSI has a great dock, an existing dock that's one of the 10 spots. They would love to have us there. They have plans for 1,100 new condo units, mixed use there, that they would love to have. And then from an emergency response perspective, and Portland's City Harbor Master is part of Portland's Fire Bureau, and he's one of our key champions for this, saying we absolutely need to have a ferry to help out with water safety. We actually helped with an emergency response when we were just out there running the river a year ago. And then in terms of the environmental benefits on this, just one boat, and to scale, it would be 7 vessels. But just one vessel is 600 people a day. 7 vessels is 1 million cars per year that would be displaced. So looking at the annual carbon emission, the displacement, that gives you a sense for up to 95 million pounds of CO2 emissions that would be offset. So I put that up against any transit project that's out there. That's what's so darn compelling. And then the benefits I've already kind of alluded to. And then we've had really a 3-phase approach to this. So you can see under phase 1, where it was really kind of doing our homework. And we started off looking at governance, and we created this 501c3. The IRS granted us our nonprofit status because we are doing the work a public transit agency is not. That's why we exist. So even though I have spent 35 years in transportation infrastructure and economic development, I feel just like when I was a state of Oregon employee, or just like when I was with the Port of Portland. It's just now that, like, Keith and I are largely volunteers doing this altruistically to bring a best practice to our region. And so I think a lot of people just don't understand that we go to work every day, we put in 12-hour days, but we don't have a paycheck behind it. So I just think people need to kind of acknowledge that. So sometimes I'm like, okay, my PowerPoint's not quite as sophisticated. It's a group of volunteers that's doing it. And so that's a big difference. So phase 1, I'm super proud of the work we did, about $9 million conservatively in pro bono value. So this pretty PowerPoint was put together by Sockeye Creative. We have an Intel engineer that did our scheduling software that was valued by PBOT at $250,000. It's been amazing, the hearts of Portlanders coming and rallying around us. Phase 2 is squarely where we are right now, planning, looking to partner, fund, and operate on this. And I can't echo enough what Keith said is foundational to the success is partnering and finding like-minded people that want to work together without ego, without worrying about taking credit for it, and saying, this is my town and we need to make it better. and let's come together rather than tearing one another down. So like-minded people very much. Hi, Xavier was on a presentation I did last night. And then phase 3 is basically building out the docks and the ferries. And so the way the Federal Transportation Administration is set up for the ferry program is they expect you to come back year after year to ask for more money. So that's if you're Seattle, San Francisco, Boston, New York, that money is there, over $300 million for this. So for maintenance, or you want to put in for another dock. And again, we meet all the requirements on this. We simply have to have a public agency partner. And that's it for me. Okay, question. Yeah. Thanks, you guys. I know it's a lot. Why don't you come up here and then you guys can fire questions at us, because I know there were some online. Okay. Or how do we do this so we see the question? Do you have them?
I can ask it from here if you'd like.
Cool.
Shelby was asking, will there be an opportunity to subsidize the ticket cost for those people who are at or below the poverty line?
Oh gosh, we would certainly love that. And those are some of the conversations we've had with Sunrise as well. Right now, the cost per seat on a ferry is about $6. Pre-COVID, the cost per seat on TriMet was about $20 a seat. And pre-COVID for TriMet, that subsidy was about 84%. I honestly don't know what it is right now. For us, a $6 seat and the ticket price at $3.50. So the subsidy is actually under 50%. So if there are opportunities and funds to come in and underwrite the rest of that, absolutely, we'd love to see that happen. But my point is the cost per seat is very, very affordable. It's less than one seventh the cost of, on average, other modes of transit. We want those other modes of transit to be successful. But for anybody that comes in and says, oh no, a ferry's too expensive, patently untrue. You know, that's what we have to debunk. So let's just be honest and let's deal with facts and data here.
Oh.
I have a question. I just want to reiterate the Downtown Neighborhood Association and the Land Use and Transportation Committee support for your project. There was one question that did come up last night that we didn't have time to kind of ask for you. Every time Walt promises me we're going to come in at an hour 30 and it's always 2 hours. But one of them is, so we do have this recurring funding from the feds. Now, the concern that was brought up is, there's no guarantee that a future presidential administration may be as sympathetic to sustainably minded forms of transportation like the ferry. There's the concern that if we get this up and running, it becomes an integral part of our transportation network, and that federal funding goes away. An organization like TriMet or even the city would then have to be responsible for that continued subsidy, or the entire program would go away and create some fissures there. So I was hoping you could kind of speak to this concern about the long-term viability and the kind of future of federal involvement in like water transit.
Yeah, and this is an excellent question, and it's probably an hour-long response. But when you start looking at the cost per passenger and also the carbon output per passenger and the cost for all of that, I don't believe a community like Portland cannot do the passenger ferry service. It's just a foundational when you look at all of the needs here, let alone from a congestion perspective. For the infrastructure bill, you have that, both that and the inflation bill. It's true, it's a 5-year cycle. And after we're in year 2 of it. After that goes away, the guess is, in the kind of the worst case scenario, it will go back to being about $40 million a year. That's what it was pre-inflation bill, right? So if we go back to that, then we're going to be looking at tapping in to that amount for it. But for the operations, keep in mind, infrastructure bill is only for infrastructure. So ultimately what I'm saying is you're not adding a dock or another boat. You're keeping the existing service. We're really looking at something like PSEF, which has $100 million allocated over the next 5 years for green transit, and that would be the future help for the subsidy on the operational side. So we need to go in and compete for it, but we don't see that as a federal thing. We see that as being a local subsidy. So it's difference between operations and infrastructure. Largely the federal funds is for infrastructure. So you don't build out as fast if that federal money goes away. In terms of operational subsidy for PSEF, we feel like we've got a really good shot at it. And we don't want all of it. We just need a little piece of it. But of that 100 million, if we can get 8 million of it, that would take us through, several years of operations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Xavier.
I have a broad, very question. So, with the pandemic, obviously there have been huge shifts in commuting patterns into central Portland. And I'm just curious how you think that affects the various prospects of new transit service.
Thank you for the question, Jay. It's both, we look at OHSU and that survey of their population and the fact that that was so overwhelming. And the talk at OHSU is if we can forestall and not have to build another parking garage for our employees, that would be great. But this is very much demand based. And so the nice thing is we're not going in saying the next stop will be here or here or here. It's going to be, based on demand. We also started this project on the little timeline. The first report we did, or the first study we did, was a demand survey. And that was with Metro. Metro ran it, and PBOT and TriMet helped to co-sponsor it, and gave us the green light that there's adequate. So when you look at commuters, and even if it's Vancouver to Portland, 135,000 commuters Monday through Friday a day cross that I-5 bridge. 35,000 of them are coming into the downtown core. So even if you want to say with COVID, even if those numbers are squishier to 20,000, C-Tran is moving maybe 1,000 a day. That's our target market. It's 24,000 people a day. That's just one example. So they're really good questions that we're asking ourselves. But if we go into a community, we've got to make sure we've got adequate demand each and every day. Yes.
How are you working with transit agencies? Make sure it's safe and accessible access.
Oh, it's a really great question, and it's a tough one. It's because this whole engagement with the transit agencies has been tricky. Candidly, we now have PBOT under Commissioner Maps, who's been a champion since he took office. He's new to PBOT as of January, and they're getting to know their team and their staff, but that's been very favorable. They're honestly kind of responding to our plans on that. We very much would love to have conversations like with TriMet to say, hey, can we get another bus line or bring in a smaller little shuttle? But we just sourced a small little trolley that's being electrified that I found that no one knows about, but I got to see it on a tour, and I sent it off to the chair of Cathedral Park because she's had this vision for a little commuter shuttle for about 10 years. So, we could run something like that. Kyle Johnson of the bike community, he's talked about putting a bike hub in there at Cathedral Park to really mirror the one at OHSU. So lots of different opportunities.
So I have never lived in Portland. I'm not from Portland. I think this is such a fun and inspired idea. Do you know why maybe hasn't been considered in the past, like what the roadblocks were?
Yeah, it's another great question. And we had ferries. So those of you that are from the area, Taylor's Ferry, Boone's Ferry, Highway 26 and Canyon Road, that was a roadway from the ferry stop in downtown Portland. And it was just made of logs to go all the way out to the west to go to the coast, literally. So we had that. The former I-5 bridge that connects Washington State to Oregon was owned by the power company, PP&L. And the same month that the new bridge opened, they shut off the ferry that connected the two states because there was this new thing called the car that came, this newfangled thing. So it is our heritage. And I want to really make a point. It's why the native tribes located here. So the confluence of two rivers, it's an incredibly rich and vibrant area. And up at Celilo Falls, up the gorge, at one point was a top 5 trade center in the world. That's how vibrant it was, you know, prior to damming it. So we have this history of it here, but cars kind of got in the way. And now it's time to, you know, reclaim our, hey, we're the river city here. Are we really? We're definitely the bridge city. But let's get back to getting out on our rivers and provide more and better access to our rivers.
That was such good background. I wish I had like had that at the very beginning of this presentation. I feel like it just wrapped it all up.
Oh, thank you. Well, I should add it in there. We do have a piece on it on our website. And one of my board members is Allison Tivnon, is a Beaverton City Council member. She spent a lot of time at the Oregon History Center. So she speaks of it so much more eloquently than I do. But yeah, there's a lot of history there.
I have a question. This is more for the Green Loop folks, although I feel like it might be a little related. I live in the downtown area in Nob Hill, and I spend a lot of time in the cart blocks. Yeah, I'm always telling people to go down there because it's a great little spot. And you know, I think about what the future of downtown might be, and I always wish there was more housing to choose from. And I was wondering how that need for more housing might fit in with the strategy of the Green Loop.
Yeah, so that is a discussion I've been having specifically in some areas around Central East Side. That's zoned industrial, right? And there's some areas there that have been looking at developing housing, but they're zoned industrial. So this is probably a longer process, but could we create some zoning ordinances around the Green Loop to promote more housing? Because one of the things too, for those that don't know, right now, Portland is slower to recover than most cities. And it's mostly because there's not a lot of, you know, people living downtown. We have dense inner core of office buildings. And so that might be something that can help spur it along. But it's going to be a longer process.
Good questions. We got everything online? All right. So would you mind taking our picture so we can post it of the three of us?
Okay.
You guys, thank you
Thanks for coming out.
so much. We really appreciate it.